All right, we're waiting just a few more minutes. Super excited to have you here live. As most of these are done, the majority of our participants will watch these recorded when it's available in their time zone and when it's embedded in their courses. So always happy to have a live audience, so thank you for joining us. So I believe it's time to get started. Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Professor George Saltzman, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first in the second series of webinars that are focused on the integration of artificial intelligence and other advanced digital education's innovation. This series is co-hosted by the UNESCO Institute for Information Technology and Education and Shanghai Open University, and is made free for all to attend and free to integrate into your educational curriculum or courses should you choose to do so. Want to thank our sponsors of UNESCO and Shanghai Open University for being able to make this available. As we kick off our second year of webinar, we find ourselves reminded almost daily of the continued advances of AI and other digital technologies that are happening in the world around us. Each day, we're both amazed and perplexed with how powerful these technologies are and how they might impact how we teach and learn in years ahead. This series continues to explore what impact these technology advances might play in education and especially in teacher education development. To help us gain additional insight is Sarah Knight from Jisc, who will be presenting on creating an excellent blended learning experience by implementing learning that is digital by design. Originally from South Africa, Sarah joins us from Bristol, England in the UK, where she serves as the head of learning and teaching transformation within the higher education directorate at Jisc. Jisc is the UK's digital data and technology agency focused on tertiary education, research, and innovation. During her 19 years at Jisc, Sarah has led transformation projects on curriculum design, digital capacities, and learners' experience of technology. Sarah is charged with taking forward the outcomes of Jisc's Learning and Teaching Reimagined initiative by supporting universities with their digital transformation of learning, teaching, and assessment. Sarah also established the Jisc Student Experience Expert Group, an active community which provides consultation and dissemination opportunities for Jisc. And certainly not least, Sarah continues to champion Jisc Change Agents Network to support staff-student partnerships working on technology-enhanced curriculum projects. So Sarah, welcome. Allow me to express a huge thank you for joining us. And I will begin to turn the screen over to you here in just a moment. A reminder to each of our participants, if you have questions or comments that you would like to make to presenter, please do that in the chat window below. So, Sarah, I believe the screen is yours. Oh.
Thank you very much, George and Nikki, for allowing me the opportunity of joining you today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are and wherever you are watching this. We're delighted to share with you today some of the work we've been doing in Jisc, and I will say a little bit more about that in a moment. I'm going to share my screen and just get my slides ready to present to you. So, as George said, we're going to be talking to you today on creating an excellent blended learning experience and looking at some of the research we've been doing in the United Kingdom to help our staff and students at the universities in the UK to really make the most of technology, but discussing first and foremost this from the point of view of good pedagogical practice. So I'm going to start the presentation by giving you a little bit of an insight into what Jisc is and what we do at Jisc to share the context for this work. Then moving on to talking about how we can develop a vision for digital, particularly in relating to learning, teaching and assessment, but also recognising that underpinning that is looking at how we can support our university or our college or our organisation with our digital vision holistically. Importantly for us in the United Kingdom, we've been doing a lot of work involving students in co-designing and co-creating the digital experience, and I'll share some of our key findings from that work. And then moving forward to share some of our recent practice in relation to learning and curriculum design, and of course included within that, assessment and the role that technology plays. And of course, as George mentioned in his introduction, we are seeing AI play a very dominant role in assessment at the moment worldwide. So I hope that you'll be able to take away some key messages to reflect on and to embed within your practice, and also think about what you might want to do in terms of sharing some of the key messages with your colleagues as well. So Jisc and what we do. Well, I've been very fortunate and very privileged to work for Jisc over the past 19 years. And Jisc is an organisation that exists to support UK education, and in particular tertiary education, with the use of technology to improve education and research. We work with organisations across the world that have similar roles, and we're very fortunate as today to be able to share our learning, but also to enable that knowledge exchange between our organisations and between our different countries and contexts. In the Jisc, we serve the whole of the United Kingdom, and you'll see from that image there that includes Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England. We work very closely with all our universities and our colleges, as well as including other bodies, including some schools, research institutes and other national institutions. We also work very closely with similar organisations in the UK that have a remit in supporting education. What we do is vast, from the connection that enables our universities and colleges to connect to the internet and to bring people together through our National Research and Education Network, through to helping the sector understand some of the key challenges in relation to the use of technology in education by providing expert advice and practical assistance, through to negotiating sector-wide deals to shared services and to access collections of resources, to also then providing specific support around some of the challenge areas and some of the essential areas that enable our education system to work, including those relating to connectivity and cybersecurity, but also around open research, AI, and I'll say a little bit more about that during the presentation, data analytics, and of course some services that are very central to the student experience. So we have a vast range of work that we do, and some of that I will share with you today. But I hope it prompts some further discussions, and do feel free to visit our website as we have a wealth of information there across all of those different areas. So moving forward then and thinking about developing our vision for digital, I think this quote is a really valuable one. It's a quote that comes from the Pro-Vice Chancellor for the Open University, a university that does a huge amount of distance learning and online learning. And this quote, I think, is very telling in terms of where we see the future of education, and importantly, thinking about the jobs and the careers that our students that we are supporting will be moving into. We know that it's a completely digital workplace now in whatever profession we are working in. And of course, through the pandemic, we have seen that grow in terms of the need and the demand for students that have those digital skills, those capabilities of digital fluency, to be able to work in a professional environment that is digitally enabled. So how can we really ensure that we are designing a curriculum that is going to enable our students to leave as digitally capable graduates? So this is an activity that you might like to do, is to think about your aspiration in your context, in your organisation for digital learning and teaching, and to sum up what that aspiration would be in relation to thinking about your students. What would you like their learning experience to be? How would you be able to take that forward and integrate into the design of your practice and support those students? If we're thinking about teacher education as well, it's also providing those teachers to inspire, to use technology, to keep up to date, to be thinking about how that can transfer into their workplace and into the schools and the students that they're going to be working with. So something for you to have a think about as we move through this presentation. Now, the title of the presentation had the word blended learning in, and in the UK at the moment and post-pandemic, we are seeing that definition of blended learning is being explored and delved into. And I thought it would be useful perhaps just to set the context of the way in which we are referring to blended learning within the UK. We have a few definitions on that slide, and I think that last point there is something that we are very much evolving, as blended now is so broad and is used to define the different modes of learning that students may be experiencing. Within the UK post-pandemic, we are seeing that learning takes place in a number of different environments, whether that be on campus, whether that be online, whether that be asynchronous or synchronous learning. And our staff are having to navigate quite a challenging environment to think about what blend, what ways in which they can combine the technology with the face-to-face experience of our students. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that as we move into some of the sections of this presentation. But you might want to think about, again, going back to your context and your country, what does blended learning mean to you? How do you combine and how do your students learn in that combination of on-site and online? And what is that mix looking like? We're aware, of course, that many students may only have an online experience. And there again, we've learned a great deal from the pandemic around how we can design an online experience for students that is high quality, that is engaging, that is interactive. So some thoughts there as well, just to keep in mind as we move through this session. Now, before we go into more detail around learning, teaching and assessment, one of the things that we do need to be considering is looking at our definition of what it means to have a digitally enabled organisation in order for digital learning, teaching and assessment to be successful. So in the United Kingdom, we're very much looking at the moment at working with universities to support them on how they can digitally transform their organisation. And we appreciate that this goes across many areas within an organisation. Of course, education and research is part of that, but it's also looking at those other underpinning processes that staff are working towards. It touches on all the professional services side. It touches on the way that we interact with students at every point of their journey, from pre-arrival through to alumni. So for us, we have been using the EDUCAUSE definition that talks about digital transformation as a series of deep and coordinated culture, workforce and technology shifts that enables new educational operating models and is able to transform the institution's business model, strategic directions and value proposition. When we talk about digital transformation and thinking more broadly and more holistically across an organisation, we know that we have to be considering people at the very heart of that process. When we're talking about the way in which digital can impact on an institution, we have to recognise that we need to be supporting staff and students with their development of their digital skills. We have to understand their expectations and experiences of using technology, and that will then have a big impact on the way in which technology is being used to support those core business activities. And importantly as well, considering the infrastructure and the access to the systems, to the networks, to the buildings that our students and staff are using to deliver that experience. So digital transformation impacts on all of those key areas. And when we're looking at what makes for a successful organisation in relation to digital, we need to be considering all of those different areas in order to be able to support the effective student experience for all our students. We recently published a report which summarised and gave a snapshot of where UK universities were in developing their digital environments and their digital strategies. And I've shared a link to that report that you might find interesting to explore as further reading. This report is very much aimed at senior leaders within universities to think about the ways in which they are supporting and enabling their staff to make best use of technology. And recognising, of course, that everyone is at a different point in that journey. And we're seeing very different levels of maturity as we move across the sector. And I think that's replicated in many countries across the world in terms of the investment that has been made in digital states. We are working with our universities to develop what we call a framework for digital transformation, so that when we are talking to our universities and talking to our senior leaders, we can explore the different elements that make up and underpin the successful transformation of our universities and of our organisations. This enables us to really drill down into the areas that need to be considered in order to successfully take forward and implement a digital environment and a digital university. Of course, within there is the elements of the foundation element there relates to the digital and physical infrastructure, and that relates to the physical and the virtual spaces that our students and staff are using and support they need in terms of having a robust, reliable and secure infrastructure. We have an overarching element there that relates to organisational culture and recognising the importance of leadership in driving forward that digital change, looking at ensuring that we are considering the digital identity, the well-being and the areas of change that we need to be moving forward on for all our staff and students within the organisation. The core knowledge practice areas relate to functions of the university, whether that be focusing on research, whether that be in the areas of curriculum development, and you'll see there we have digital teaching and assessment and digital learning and learner experience very much part of that area, which is where the focus of today lies with this session. But we also need to be considering the use of data and recognising that as we are gathering a wealth of data in terms of how our students and how our staff are using the different technical systems, we need to be ensuring that we have policies and practices and good processes in place to support the effective, secure use of our data and how that can then feed back into the development of the curriculum, for example. And lastly, ensuring that we have got in place those really important ways in which we can communicate and collaborate across the organisation, but also with the community that we are working within, and how we can actually build and ensure that we have sound relationship management across those areas going forward. So we'll be publishing our framework shortly and working with the universities to then develop a maturity model to help them assess and develop their digital transformation. But as I've said through our definition of digital transformation that we're using from EduCause, that very much at the heart of that has to be starting with our staff and students and enabling them to make most use of the technology they have access to. And of course, digital skills or digital capability, as we refer to in the UK, is absolutely crucial to that. For us, we define digital capability as those skills that staff and students need to live, learn and work in a digital society. We developed a digital capability framework for staff and students in 2015, and updated that recently with the model that's on the screen. And you'll see a link there to a framework that has been adopted almost universally across the UK from a tertiary sector perspective. It has also informed the development of other frameworks in other countries, for example, the European Digital Competency Framework. And then many other examples where that has been picked up and adapted and contextualized in individual countries. So we're very pleased to have that as a shared understanding, certainly in the sector, of what it means to be digitally capable. And taking that one step further, we have worked with professional bodies to develop what we call role profiles. So then looking at those 6 elements of the framework and looking at how those areas apply and what the skills and capabilities are, if you are a lecturer, if you are teaching, if you are a leader, a researcher, a learning technologist, or working in the library and learning resources, and really being able to then drill down to what those minimum capabilities are for those different roles in order to be able to effectively use digital. Those role profiles have been an excellent starting point for universities and for colleges to enable discussions with staff and students in relation to having that shared understanding around being digitally capable. And importantly, if we're thinking of teaching practice, what it means to be digitally capable and the skills that we need in order to effectively integrate digital into our practice. And also for our students to understand the skills that they require to learn in a digital environment and to prepare them for that digital workplace. So a follow-on from that work was the development of a self-assessment tool for students and for staff, so they're able to assess their understanding in relation to our digital capability framework around their different digital practices. This is a self-assessment questionnaire based within an online tool that staff and students can undertake. And we've developed various different question sets for different roles as well, including leaders, to be thinking about their digital practice. After going through the assessment, they are then able to access a report which will give them guidance in terms of where they are in relation to their digital capabilities. Not judgmental, but very developmental, and also then points through to a set of curated, freely available resources which staff and students can go on to use. So ways in which they can then develop their continuing professional development and their understanding around the different elements relating to digital capabilities and their practice. We developed a question set specifically for thinking about how to integrate digital into teaching, and that has been very helpful in helping staff to understand some of the areas that they need to be considering in relation to designing an effective learning experience with digital. And alongside that, a question set that relates to accessible and inclusive practice in relation to digital, which of course is absolutely vital when we're thinking about designing our learning and ensuring that our learning is accessible and inclusive to all students. Now, one of the areas of work that we've felt is quite critical in terms of understanding digital learning and how we can develop our practice is understanding our students' experiences. We have been researching students, and going back to 2005 actually, had a program of research around understanding students' experiences of technology and their digital environment. In 2016, we launched our Digital Experience Insight surveys, and these have been running year on year across further and higher education in the UK to survey our students around their experiences and expectations of digital. Of course, during the pandemic, there was a very different response as every student was touched by digital and required to be able to access their learning remotely using technology. Our survey in 2021-22 is what I'll share with you, and some of the findings, which I think will be relevant to thinking about your practice and how you might be developing the practice post-pandemic. We gathered over 33,000 higher education student views and nearly 11,500 further education learners. The data that we collected was quantitative, but we also collected some qualitative data, and that was very insightful. And in hearing more the student voice, hearing the areas that they felt worked particularly well in their institution, but also hearing those areas which weren't working quite so well and needed further development. So universities and colleges had this data at a local level, but we as Jisc were able to aggregate that data and share back some sector level findings. So for our survey that we ran in 21-22, we found that students were using a combination of on-site and online learning. This was towards the end of our lockdown phase, and where universities and colleges were starting to bring students back in on campus. We also had some interesting findings to see that students actually enjoyed a combination of on-site and online learning. And that was sort of echoed by two parallel studies at the time, which felt that students, although 57% of students would mainly prefer in person, that 66% of students in a similar survey wanted a blend of in-person and online teaching. So we're recognizing that although we are now moving out of the pandemic, the importance of still using digital to enhance the student experience was very important for us to consider. The expectations that students coming into university now have, or into college, are bringing with them that understanding and that experience they had during the pandemic, and still expect to see a level of technology used within their learning. In the survey, we asked a question relating to what different types of ways in which they were interacting with technology. And here we can see that there is an interesting drop when we start to move towards some of the more interactive, or what we call transformational experiences that students may have in relation to the types of technology in use. We see that when we start to look at the collaboration aspects, if we're starting to encourage that group working or using virtual labs or games or simulation, some of the more interactive and some of the more innovative uses of technology, there was certainly a decrease in the number of learners that had experience of that. And that's interesting, as we've seen this trend not really move considerably forward with the advances of technology over the past few years. And it's an area where we feel technology can bring great benefit, particularly if we are thinking about the use of immersive learning, of simulations, of the ways in which we can start to build in some authentic learning and assessment opportunities with those more innovative types of technology. And of course, the role that AI plays within that as well. So with our qualitative data, we were able to pull out some findings from our students in relation to the areas that they felt were very positive in learning online and using technology, but also areas where they felt slightly more negative in relation to their experience. And in terms of the positives, there was a good list there in relation to enhanced accessibility. They had some savings in terms of not having to travel onto campus. The lecture recordings enabled them to revisit content and revise effectively. They felt that having that balance and having that being able to fit learning into their lives was good for their well-being. And they were able to develop some of the independent research skills that were necessary in order to work through some of the content they had independently. But equally, there were also some negatives, and students were listing issues in relation to access. And we know that the term digital poverty in the UK is one that is very prevalent in ensuring that students do have access to reliable Wi-Fi, thinking about their access and the device that they're accessing their learning through. And in many cases, some cases, it may be still a mobile device or a mobile phone. And that doesn't give them the full capability of being able to access all of their learning resources, for example. But we also know that there were feelings of isolation and students feeling that they weren't able to connect with other students in an online environment as they would face-to-face. That some learning was very non-interactive, it was sitting in a very didactic way, listening perhaps to what you're doing at the moment through PowerPoint presentations, but without any interactivity or connection with their learners. And in some cases, the digital assessments did cause issues for them, particularly in terms of access again, but also some of the wellbeing issues were being echoed there. So that gives us some interesting quotes, which I thought I would pull out here just to share with you. I think it's always valuable to hear the views of students, and some of these quotes I think echo some of those comments on the previous slide. So just reiterating some of those points, and importantly, that every learner is different. And although we can make some assumptions there and we can pull out some trends, it is so important to understand the preferences, the experiences, the expectations of the learners that you're working with. So building back better and taking that forward to inform the future student experience, there were 4 key areas that we felt in the UK we need to be addressing. Digital equity, as I've mentioned, ensuring access for all, ensuring that we have got the basics right in terms of the infrastructure that students and staff are using, looking at the pedagogical design, and that's something that we will move on to in a moment in consideration around learning curriculum design and assessment design, and really ensuring there are opportunities for engagement and interactivity, particularly if we are looking at an online environment. And a theme that comes through very strongly in the work we're doing at the moment is working in partnership with our students and ensuring that we are having the opportunity of co-designing their learning opportunities. We have a large programme of work in the UK that really does echo the benefits of working collaboratively with students as partners. And that's something that many universities are building on. So what can we improve? And I think that last point around designing effectively and thinking about the way that we rethink our curriculum and assessment design is an important one. And acknowledging that if we are designing aspects of online learning, we need to recognise that there are differences and design that in accordingly. We also need to ensure that we can improve group and class interactions and also scaffold in opportunities for students to be able to develop their collaborative skills and working together with other learners to mirror what will be happening when they move into the workplace, where there is a lot of online collaboration and a lot of requiring us to develop those skills within students so they're prepared for that. We also need to ensure that we revisit our online platforms and really ensure that they are clearly structured and easy to navigate. And there is consistency across those different modules or different courses that students are working through. Often there is a lack of consistency, and that can be very confusing for students. Also ensuring the timeliness, if they are recording lectures and having access to those, that they are timely and able to access those. And to be able to improve access to support and online materials is extremely important, not just in relation to their learning materials, but also any support they may need for their well-being, for developing their digital skills, and for supporting their wider student experience. So we have developed a benchmarking tool that is quite useful for students and staff to consider when designing online learning and looking at the minimum requirements that need to be there to ensure that students are having that high quality student experience with digital. That is a snapshot of one of the areas of the toolkit that's freely available, and you're able to access that from the link there on the screen. But you'll see there that there are some statements there to self-assess your practice against, or your organisational practice against, when thinking about providing that excellent, high quality digital experience for your students. You'll see there that the column there that says outstanding relates to students that are actively involved in the development of their learning and co-creating and feeding into those policies and practices that are being developed. So student voice is very central to that last column there. So that might be a useful activity to review and to think about how you might be able to self-assess where your organisation is in providing that support to your students. The surveys and more details around those reports, if you are interested in delving into that in more detail, are available from those links there. Our 2022-23 surveys are running at the moment with our universities and colleges, and we'll be reporting on those during the course of this year. That will, I think, make very interesting reading, again, to see how students' expectations and experiences are changing now we are moving forward from the pandemic. Equally, we've developed some further resources that can really start thinking about how you can shape and support your student digital experience. And there's some very lovely journey posters there that you might be interested in reviewing, as well as the links there to the benchmarking tools that I've mentioned in the earlier slide. So thinking about the student experience and thinking about understanding our students, we're then moving into bringing that into how we design our courses and how we design our curricula, our assessments. And I think this is a very interesting quote that came from the interim Vice-Chancellor at the University of Sussex, David Maguire, who was putting those words there in relation to how much had been achieved during the pandemic and the real shift and pivot into online learning that would have taken many, many years to plan and execute had it not been for the pandemic. But that sort of warning message there to say what has been achieved so far has mostly been about adding new tools to old pedagogy, rather than rethinking the ways in which digitally enabled education can be taken across the board. So the next challenge that we're working with universities on is to think about how we can integrate digital into the core university strategy. And that links back into our work around the digital transformation framework and thinking about how holistically we can drive our organisations forward with digital across all areas of the curriculum. The challenges that have come through post-pandemic, some of these are echoed from what we heard earlier from our students, but recognising that when we are considering redesigning the curriculum, we do need to be thinking about some of the well-being aspects and, of course, the cost of living crisis that we are currently experiencing. The pandemic has moved us forward into recognising that there are many health constraints. There are severe issues in relation to cost of living for our students and our staff, thinking about travelling into campus, and for students to be able to have that choice of where and when they want to study. We are, of course, seeing student engagement as another challenge in terms of how we manage that diversity, how we are trading that personalisation of learning with getting that feeling of belonging and community with our students. Looking at how we can also develop the capabilities and recognising, of course, that staff workload has increased. And when we are talking about rethinking our designs of learning and assessment, the impact that does have in terms of staff workload, particularly when we are thinking about understanding the different roles in relation to different spaces, modelling time on task, and also how that relates to recognition in terms of academic practice in digital. So we do need to be linking organisational with local levels of design via place and time management, and also with the data flows around that, and thinking about that mix and that blend of the physical and the virtual estates as well, and how those are managed to support that blended model of delivery. So we have been doing a review of learning and curriculum design in the UK, and looking at how universities are approaching and supporting their staff with this. We have a report, and there is a link there to the report that you might like to explore, along with a podcast, which Helen Beetham and Sheila McNeil, who worked with us on that study, recorded. And that's a really lovely overview of the key messages that have come out of that research to date, and also highlights some case studies and some vignettes of practice from many universities across the UK in how they are supporting their staff in taking forward their design of their digital practice. We conducted a review of all the different approaches to learning and curriculum design, so how universities are supporting their staff to think about designing their learning activities, but also taking that broader step out of thinking about how they're designing their programs of study. And there were over 30 different approaches that we reviewed. And again, the report highlights those 30 approaches, and also the different approaches, whether they were a principles-based approach or whether they were a process-based approach, how they were supporting staff in bringing curriculum teams together, and the different models that they were referencing. You'll see some of those models on the screen, including Bloom's taxonomy, Laurillard's activity types, and many others. So there is some very valuable, I think, information contained there if you are looking for examples to apply to your own practice and supporting those conversations with staff around developing their digital practice. At the start, I defined what we meant, or what the UK was understanding by the term blended learning. And through this work and through the work that we're doing with universities, we are revisiting those terms. Not only are we using the term blended in the UK, we also have terms like hybrid, high flex, all of which mean different things to different people and have different definitions in different contexts. We need to be able to start to develop a shared understanding of those terms, but also looking at how time and space support learning, different student groups, and what choices students have. How do we develop those practices, and how do we develop our understanding of how to piece together these different factors to enable us to design an effective curriculum? So that's work that is ongoing, and we're happy to share further details of that through the Jisc website. So lastly, I'm going to end with how we relate that to assessment and feedback. And we know that assessment and feedback is such an important part of learning, and we need to be considering that. And as this series is looking at AI, I thought it would be really important to showcase some of the work that Jisc is doing in this space. We have a National Centre for AI, and that centre is bringing together good practice and examples on how AI can support different aspects of learning and assessment. We know that there is a great opportunity for disruption, and we're seeing that at the moment, certainly worldwide, in terms of the rise of ChatGPT-3 and other similar tools. But there is also an opportunity to think about how that can benefit education and how it can support students perhaps to develop some higher level critical thinking skills. Looking at the discussion and debate around plagiarism, around the ways in which we can better design our assessments to move away from those debates around how to stop students cheating, but thinking more about how we can support students to understand the ethical behaviour that's required, not just when they're in our universities or colleges, but as they move out into the workplace and the world of ethics. So looking at ways in which we can use AI in a positive light to really support staff and students, use that in a more effective and pedagogically sound way. We also know that there is a great rise in the use of data analytics and also in the use of immersive technologies. And those two are creating new ways to assess expertise and skills. And I do encourage you to have a look at some of the examples and some of the tools that we have brought together under the National Centre for AI that can give you some demonstrations of those different aspects of work. So at the moment, our work in assessment and feedback has been to understand assessment as learning. We know that there is a traditional view where we are assessment of learning, and looking at how we can move from seeing assessment as that endpoint where we are assessing our learning outcomes to thinking of how we can develop in and design in more formative opportunities for students to assess and understand their learning throughout their course of study. That is defined as our assessment for learning. But we really want to move towards assessment as learning and consider the entire process, the lived experience of students and staff, when active learners contribute to decision making and are able to monitor and regulate their own learning, and really seeing that as the aspiration of where we want to move assessment towards. In order to help our universities achieve that, we developed some principles of good learning, teaching and assessment. And those 7 principles there have been developed in consultation with our community. And we feel that those are very good principles for which we need to keep in mind when we are designing our assessment and our learning. We need to be thinking about how we can support our learners to understand the requirements and the criteria for each of the tasks that are being assessed. We want our assessment and our learning to be accessible, inclusive, and compassionate. We want to ensure that we are fostering active learning and really encouraging our students to engage with learning resources, with their peers and with their tutors, and can look at having those opportunities for formative development. We want to develop autonomous learners, and by encouraging self-generated feedback, self-regulation and reflection and dialogue. And we want to be able to ensure that we have the right assessment at the right time, supported by efficient business processes. We want to be working with our students to engage them and foster a motivated learning community where we can critique and develop our practice together. And lastly, and importantly, linking back into thinking about authentic assessment, we want to ensure that we're promoting learner employability and ensuring that we are designing authentic tasks and promoting ethical conduct, and really having that at the heart of what we do and underpinning the assessment literacies that our students need to develop. I've just included this slide because I think it illustrates that last point around promoting learner employability and being able to assess authentic tasks and promote ethical conduct. There's 3 examples there from the University of Brunel, Northampton University and the University of Staffordshire, where they have replaced traditional forms of assessment with more project-based learning, problem-solving activities, and using online scenarios to replace sort of in-person training exercises, in this case at Northampton for police officers and for law students. And by having those real-world scenarios, students are far better prepared for their careers as they move into their professions. The last example there from the University of Staffordshire is in their Health Innovation Centre, where their use of clinical simulation for learning and assessment is exemplary, together with their use of immersive learning suites. You'll see that the image there is not of a real patient, it's of a mannequin, which is very lifelike, and students are able to work through scenarios which they would be experiencing in real life as nurses or healthcare practitioners. And this gives them the opportunity of experiencing the pressures, the real life scenarios that they will be moving into, but whilst being assessed and whilst that can then inform their learning and really ensuring that they are developing those skills that they need as they move out into their professions. So we are starting to see some amazing examples, a very inspirational practice happening where students are really being able to have those authentic learning and assessment opportunities and be able to really work quite closely with employers, with those professional bodies, to really ensure that the students are gaining the skills and the capabilities as well as the knowledge that they need for when they move out into the workplace. So we have an assessment and feedback guide that you're very welcome to have a look at. We've got those 7 principles outlined in detail. And for each one of those principles, we discuss the ways in which technology can support the principle. We highlight that with examples of practice from across the UK HE sector, but also internationally. As we know, there's some wonderful practice going on across many countries in the world, and very keen for us to be able to learn from that practice too. We have a Beyond the Technology podcast series on assessment. Please do, again, feel free to have a listen to those podcasts. There are recordings and interviews with experts across the sector and also colleagues internationally who are sharing the ways in which technology is supporting and informing the way they are designing their assessment practice. So I hope that that has given you at least one thing that you're going to take away and share with your colleagues. I hope it's given you some ideas to think about how you can integrate that into your practice, but also perhaps some prompts to think about next steps in which you might want to enhance your digital practices across these areas. Not just perhaps in your own practice, but also thinking about taking that forward across your organisation as well. So I'm going to end there. I'm going to hand back to George and see if we have any questions and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was a great presentation. I really resonated with the comment about that we're using new tools and old pedagogies. That's something that that resonates really strongly with me. We've seen so many new tools come into the system with the pandemic, but yet we're still trying to do old things with them and never quite worked right. So thank you for your time. Thank you so much for Jisc and its willingness to share all these materials with the global education community, and really appreciate that. We have a question or two for you that we've been able to gather together. So this one comes from Andy Rankin from New South Wales, Australia. Andy asks, what do you see as the success factors for organizations to achieve digital transformation? And I think you should be able to come on. Yep, there you go.
That's an excellent question, George. And that's something that we are encouraging our universities to consider, because first and foremost, it has to be about having that support and advocacy from senior leaders within their organisation. We often have seen digital be pushed perhaps down to those that have digital in their title, their remit, whereas now, post-pandemic, we are seeing the importance of senior leaders and governing boards having that understanding around how digital can really support their university moving forward. So leadership, the importance of digital skills of staff and students, and ensuring that everyone has got that understanding of what it means to be digitally capable. The investment in technology is still key, and really ensuring that we have got those underpinning, reliable, robust infrastructure, systems and platforms, as you've just said, George, in place. And lastly, involving our students and staff in these discussions, and very much feel that we are co-creating that community that can really start sharing across discipline areas, across institutions, and across countries to really enhance our knowledge and take that forward. So we're on an evolving journey, And I think we're all at different points, but we're all learning, and we're all sort of undergoing some of those similar challenges as we were discussing earlier.
I've one more question that came from Glenn Nosad from Alberta, Canada, who asked a question that I know as an administrator that I often ask, which is, what can we do to encourage our staff to develop and continue to develop their digital skills?
Such an important question, George. And I always start with saying, as an educator, we need to keep ourselves up to date with our core domain area or our discipline area. And digital is absolutely part of that. Just as we need to keep ourselves professionally updated, we need to be recognizing that digital is an aspect that we need to be continuing our practice around. So continuing professional development has to include digital. And there also has to be that recognition within the organization that digital is part of that. We have many conversations with staff in the UK who are saying, but my digital practice isn't recognized or rewarded. So there also has to be that link, and recognizing that if you are a teacher, a lecturer, a professional, that digital has to be part of those conversations around how we support our professional development going forward. It's no longer optional. It has to be an essential part of what we do.
So within the UK, how are you using, how does your organization, how do your member universities, how do their support staff help design digital into the practice, the idea of building those new pedagogies, digital from the ground up? Are there examples that you could share with the audience about that they might be able to look to or reach out to for advice or guidance or best practice?
Definitely, George. And I mentioned our review that we did of learning and curriculum design. And within there, it was really exciting to see the different approaches that universities were using. There has been a lot of focus, certainly during the pandemic and now post-pandemic, around bringing curriculum teams together and being able to, whether that be a 90-minute online webinar, in the sense that we're doing now, whether that be a half-day face-to-face event, where you can get curriculum teams coming together with some student representation, with learning technologists or instructional designers, and really start to identify those opportunities within the curriculum that are really going to be enhanced through the use of digital. So a lot of storyboarding approaches we've been using in the UK, lots of card activities, getting staff to think about moving around the different elements of their course, looking then, secondly, around the technologies that are available within the institution. So first identifying those challenge areas. What's not working so well? What can we improve upon? Then looking at the pedagogical approach and the principled approach, or looking at, for some universities, they're very much looking at a particular view. So whether that be problem-based learning and looking at how they can integrate that. And then looking at what technologies do we have in our university to really help us then achieve our aspirations for digital. Rather than always going outside and looking for something new, really making best use of what's available within the university, and ensuring then, of course, that staff and students are capable and confident to be able to use that effectively then to inform their teaching and their learning. So a lot of that goes back to giving staff time and being able to take some risks and being able to innovate. And that's a big ask after what staff have been through over the past 2.5 years with the pandemic.
Absolutely. Well, we're getting to the bottom of the hour. I want to thank you again, Sarah, for joining us. I absolutely want to thank our co-host, UNESCO Institute for Information Technology and Education, and Shanghai Open University for allowing us to be able to put on this webinar series now in our second year. I also want to thank each of you for joining us, whether that's live in person or for many of you recording, joining by a recording at a time or time zone that's more convenient for you. So Sarah, thank you for your insightful presentation. I would invite all of you to join us next week as we speak with Edward Tain, who is a college student and the creator of of GTP0, which is a free tool for teachers designed to help identify text that's created using AI-based tools like ChatGTP. That is enormously timely. It's something that's in the news all the time. Super excited to be able to invite Edward to come in and speak with you and share a tool that we believe will be very helpful in helping teachers know how to think about using AI tools like ChatGTP and use them appropriately, and how to identify use of those tools when it's inappropriate. So I know you won't want to miss that time of presentation. We look forward to seeing you next week. Again, thank you, Sarah, for all that you do. And thank you for UNESCO and to Shanghai Open University. Goodbye.